Maintaining a sharp and agile mind well past the age of 50 is not only possible, but increasingly understood through the lens of modern neuroscience. The prevailing narrative suggests that cognitive decline is an inevitable slide into forgetfulness and mental fog as the years accumulate. This widespread belief often leads individuals to accept minor lapses in memory or reduced focus as standard consequences of aging rather than treatable inefficiencies in the system. The reality is that the brain retains a remarkable capacity for plasticity and growth throughout the entire lifespan if it receives the correct signals and support. By leveraging specific protocols grounded in neurobiology, an individual can actively strengthen neural pathways and enhance the ability to encode, store, and retrieve information. This journey explores a set of practical, science-backed mechanisms that optimize brain function, turning the later decades of life into a period of cognitive clarity and high mental performance. Foundations of neuroplasticity and sleep architecture. The cornerstone of an exceptional memory lies in the biological phenomenon known as neuroplasticity, which is the nervous system's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. Andrew Huberman frequently emphasizes that plasticity is not merely a feature of childhood development, but a mechanism that can be triggered at any age through specific behaviors. The process of learning occurs when neurons fire together in specific sequences, but the actual strengthening of these connections happens during deep rest. It is during sleep that the brain consolidates the information gathered throughout the day, moving it from short-term holding patterns into long-term storage within neocortex. Without adequate sleep structure, even the most intense intellectual efforts fail to result in lasting memory retention because the solidification phase is interrupted. Sleep architecture changes as people age, often resulting in fragmented rest or a reduction in slow-wave sleep, which is critical for clearing metabolic waste from the brain. The glymphatic system becomes active during these deep stages, washing away adenosine and other byproducts that accumulate during waking hours and impair cognitive function. Huberman points out that maintaining consistent sleep timing is one of the most effective ways to preserve this cleansing process and support memory. The simple act of viewing sunlight within the first hour of waking sets the central circadian clock located in the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This light signal triggers a timed release of cortisol early in the day for alertness and sets a countdown for the release of melatonin later in the evening, ensuring that sleep onset is smooth and the cycles of rest are deep. A critical mechanism often overlooked is the relationship between body temperature and sleep depth. The body must drop its core temperature by a few degrees to initiate and maintain the deep sleep states where memory consolidation is most efficient. Strategies such as taking a warm bath or sauna before bed can paradoxically help cool the body down afterward, as the rapid heat loss that follows aids the transition into sleep. Conversely, keeping the sleeping environment cool supports the continuity of rest, preventing the midnight awakenings that disrupt the delicate chemical work of the brain. When these thermal cues are aligned with light exposure, the brain receives a powerful signal that reinforces the sleep-wake rhythm, stabilizing the neurochemical environment required for learning. Applied scenarios reveal how these protocols fit into a daily routine for someone over 50 seeking to revitalize their mind. An individual might start the day by stepping outside for 10 minutes of direct sky exposure while drinking water, avoiding sunglasses to ensure the retinal cells receive the correct lux intensity. In the evening, they might dim overhead lights to prevent the suppression of melatonin, creating a biological twilight that prepares the brain for its maintenance phase. If sleep is disrupted, they might employ a protocol like non-sleep deep rest or NSDR to mimic the restorative brain wave states of sleep during the day. This brief period of deliberate relaxation can help recover lost cognitive ground and reduce the stress hormones that otherwise degrade memory circuits. There are limitations to relying solely on behavioral cues if the underlying physiological state is compromised by untreated sleep disorders like apnea. While light and temperature are powerful tools, they cannot fully overcome mechanical obstructions to breathing that starve the brain of oxygen during the night. It is essential to distinguish between typical age-related sleep changes and medical issues that require intervention. Furthermore, the ability to shift sleep rhythms takes time and consistency, meaning that one morning of sunlight will not instantly correct decades of erratic scheduling. The system requires steady, repeated inputs to realign, meaning patience is as necessary as the protocol itself. The brain requires a specific chemical environment to mark an experience as important enough to be saved as a memory. This marking process is governed by the release of neuromodulators like acetylcholine and norepinephrine during periods of intense focus. If the brain is passive or unengaged, these chemicals remain at baseline levels, and the neural circuits associated with the experience are not flagged for strengthening during sleep. The challenge for many people as they age is not a lack of capacity, but a lack of intense, focused engagement that triggers this chemical alert system. Therefore, maintaining memory requires not just rest, but periods of high alertness where the brain is challenged to learn something new or difficult. Engagement with the world must be active rather than passive to stimulate the machinery of plasticity effectively. The passive consumption of information, such as watching television or casually reading, often fails to reach the threshold of focus required to release the necessary neurochemicals. To truly sharpen memory, the individual must pursue activities that create a sense of friction or difficulty, as this strain signals the nervous system that adaptation is required. This biological demand for effort ensures that the brain remains dynamic and responsive, treating new information as vital survival data rather than background noise. The interplay between high-focus learning bouts and deep, restorative sleep create a rhythm that keeps the aging brain robust and capable. What creates the friction? I need to feel mentally alert. Chemical modulation and focus protocols. The capacity to focus is the gateway to memory, and this state is orchestrated by a precise cocktail of neurochemicals that can be modulated through lifestyle choices. Andrew Huberman explains that the ability to concentrate relies heavily on the presence of dopamine and norepinephrine, which act as the fuel and the accelerator for mental acuity. Dopamine provides the motivation to engage with a task, while norepinephrine creates the sense of urgency and alertness required to sustain that engagement. As the brain ages, the spontaneous production of these chemicals can become less regulated, making it harder to slip into a state of deep work. However, specific leverage points exist that allow an individual to manually adjust their internal chemistry to favor high-performance states. One of the most common tools for chemical modulation is caffeine, but its effectiveness depends entirely on the timing of ingestion relative to the sleep-wake cycle. Consuming caffeine immediately upon waking can block the clearance of adenosine, the molecule responsible for sleep pressure, leading to a mid-afternoon crash when a caffeine wears off and the adenosine floods back to the receptors. A more strategic approach involves delaying caffeine intake by 90 to 120 minutes after waking. This delay allows the body's natural cortisol pulse to clear out the residual adenosine first, ensuring that the caffeine acts to sustain energy rather than simply borrow it. This simple timing adjustment can significantly enhance sustained focus throughout the morning, providing the stable attention span needed for encoding new memories. Understanding the ultradian rhythms of the brain offers another layer of control over cognitive output. The human brain is optimized for focus cycles of approximately 90 minutes, followed by a necessary period of downregulation. Attempting to force concentration beyond this window often yields diminishing returns and increases mental fatigue. By structuring the day into these 90-minute blocks of intense work followed by 20 minutes of deliberate rest, an individual works with their biology rather than against it. This rhythm prevents the burnout of neurotransmitters and keeps the memory encoding machinery fresh and responsive. It is difficult to abandon the habit of continuous, low-level multitasking, but the shift to distinct cycles of focus and rest is profound in its impact. An applied scenario for this chemical management involves a person sitting down to learn a new language or skill in the late morning, after their delayed caffeine and light exposure. They might use a visual anchor, staring at a specific point for 30 seconds to narrow their visual field, which signals the brain stem to release acetylcholine and sharpen attention. During the 90-minute session, they eliminate distractions to maintain the depth of focus required for plasticity. If they feel their attention drifting, they might use a physiological sigh. 2 quick inhales followed by a long exhale to offload carbon dioxide and reset their nervous system's alertness level. This deliberate manipulation of breath and vision acts as a manual override for the brain's arousal state. There are counterexamples where chemical modulation must be approached with caution, particularly regarding supplements or compounds intended to boost focus. Compounds that aggressively spike dopamine can lead to a subsequent crash that leaves the individual feeling lethargic and unmotivated, counteracting the benefits of the session. Furthermore, excessive reliance on stimulants can disrupt the sleep architecture discussed previously, creating a vicious cycle of fatigue and artificial alertness. The goal is to optimize the body's endogenous production of these chemicals rather than flooding the system with exogenous substances that may downregulate natural receptors over time. Balance is the key to sustainability in neurochemical enhancement. Dietary choices also play a subtle but pervasive role in the synthesis of these focus-enhancing neurotransmitters. Foods rich in tyrosine, such as eggs, lean meats, and certain nuts, provide the precursor amino acids necessary for dopamine production. Conversely, heavy carbohydrate loads during the day can trigger serotonin release, promoting relaxation and sleepiness rather than the alertness needed for memory tasks. By aligning nutrition with the demands of the day, saving heavier carbohydrate meals for the evening to aid sleep, the individual supports the chemical rhythm of the brain. This metabolic strategy ensures that the brain has the raw materials it needs to fire efficiently when the demand for focus is high. The concept of stress often carries a negative connotation, but short bursts of acute stress are actually beneficial for memory formation. The release of adrenaline during a challenging task, or even through physical stressors like cold exposure, marks the event as significant. Huberman notes that the brain is wired to remember events that are accompanied by a spike in adrenaline, a survival mechanism that can be hijacked for learning. By introducing brief periods of intensity or good stress before or during a learning bout, one can chemically tag the information as vital. This turns the biological response to challenge into a powerful tool for locking in memories. Am I timing my energy to match my most important tasks? Metabolic inputs and cardiovascular health, the physical health of the brain, is inextricably linked to the metabolic engine that powers it. The brain is an incredibly energy-demanding organ, consuming a disproportionate amount of the body's glucose and oxygen relative to its size. Andrew Huberman highlights that cardiovascular health is effectively brain health, as the delivery of these resources depends on a robust vascular system. As people age, the microvasculature in the brain can become less efficient, reducing the supply of nutrients to critical areas like the hippocampus, the memory center. However, specific types of exercise can stimulate the release of factors that not only protect existing neurons, but also encourage the growth of new ones. A primary mechanism for this neural protection is the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. This protein acts like fertilizer for the brain, supporting the survival of existing neurons and encouraging the growth of synapses. Zone 2 cardio, which is steady-state exercise performed in intensity where one can maintain a conversation, but with some effort, is particularly effective at stimulating metabolic health and blood flow without imposing excessive recovery demands. Engaging in this type of movement for 150 to 180 minutes per week keeps the vascular highways open and ensures that the brain is bathed in the oxygen and glucose it needs to function at a high level. In addition to blood flow, the regulation of insulin and glucose sensitivity is paramount for preventing cognitive decline. High variability in blood sugar can lead to inflammation and brain fog, impairing the ability to recall names, dates, and details. By building muscle mass through resistance training, the the body creates a larger sink for glucose disposal, stabilizing blood sugar levels and protecting the brain from the damaging effects of insulin resistance. Huberman suggests that a combination of endurance work and strength training provides the metabolic shield necessary to preserve memory function. It is a moment to consider that the physical movement of the body is the primary signal to the brain that survival, and therefore memory, is still a priority. An applied scenario might involve a person in their 50s or 60s dedicating time to rucking, which is simply walking with a weighted backpack. This activity elevates the heart rate into zone 2, builds postural strength, and allows for optic flow, the movement of visual images across the retina, which quiets the amygdala and reduces anxiety. During this walk, the increased blood flow delivers factors to the brain that prime it for the day's cognitive demands. Afterward, the individual might consume a meal rich in omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA, which supports the structural integrity of nerve cell membranes and reduces neuroinflammation. There are limitations to the exercise protocol, particularly for those with pre-existing orthopedic issues or cardiovascular conditions that restrict intensity. It is also possible to overtrain, creating a systemic stress response that elevates cortisol chronically, which is detrimental to the hippocampus. The objective is to find the minimum effective dose that stimulates positive adaptation without breaking down the body. Furthermore, exercise alone cannot compensate for a diet of highly processed foods that drives inflammation. The metabolic input must be holistic, addressing both the energy expenditure through movement and the fuel quality through nutrition. The connection between gut health and brain function is another frontier that impacts memory and mood. The gut-brain axis allows for bidirectional communication via the vagus nerve, meaning that the state of the microbiome can directly influence neurotransmitter levels. Consuming fermented foods or probiotics can enhance the diversity of gut bacteria, which in turn supports the production of serotonin and dopamine precursors. This biological loop reinforces the idea that memory is not just a cranial event, but a systemic one, involving the heart, the muscles, and the digestive tract. Keeping the body metabolically flexible ensures that the brain never lacks the energy required for complex thought. Beyond the mechanics of blood and sugar, the act of navigating through space during exercise engages the brain's spatial memory circuits. The hippocampus is heavily involved in spatial navigation, and moving the body through complex environments keeps this hardware active. Whether it is hiking on a trail or navigating a new city, the requirement to map the environment stimulates the very same neural structures used for semantic memory. Thus, physical movement becomes a cognitive training ground, reinforcing the neural architecture that underpins all forms of remembering. What physical activity am I doing that challenges my brain? Stress control and lifelong learning. The relationship between stress and memory is dual-natured. While acute stress aids focus, chronic stress acts as a corrosive force on the brain's architecture. Prolonged elevation of cortisol, the primary stress hormone, is known to be neurotoxic to the hippocampus, effectively shrinking the very center of the brain responsible for forming new memories. Andrew Huberman emphasizes that the ability to toggle the stress response on and off is a defining characteristic of a resilient mind. As individuals age, the brakes on the stress system can become worn, making it harder to return to baseline after a stressful event. Mastering the tools to dampen this response is essential for preserving long-term cognitive health. A powerful mechanism for real-time stress control is the physiological sigh, a breathing pattern that rapidly offloads carbon dioxide and slows the heart rate. By double inhaling through the nose and exhaling long through the mouth, one can mechanically engage the parasympathetic nervous system, signaling the brain that the immediate threat has passed. This tool allows an individual to intercept the stress response before it becomes a chronic, low-level hum that interferes with sleep and memory consolidation. Integrating this simple respiratory intervention into daily life provides a safety valve for the nervous system, protecting the brain from the cumulative wear and tear of anxiety. The final component of this cognitive framework is the pursuit of lifelong learning through deliberate play and exploration. The adult brain is often trapped in efficiency, repeating known patterns to save energy. However, neuroplasticity is triggered by errors and the subsequent correction of those errors. To keep the memory sharp, one must be willing to be a beginner again, engaging in activities where failure is frequent and part of the process. Whether it's learning a musical instrument, a new language, or a complex motor skill like dancing, the frustration of getting it wrong is the chemical trigger for neural growth. This willingness to embrace difficulty keeps the plastic machinery of the brain youthful and responsive. Integrating all these elements, sleep, chemistry, metabolism, and stress control, creates a comprehensive shield against cognitive decline. The individual who prioritizes deep rest, manages their light environment, engages in regular Zone 2 exercise, and actively pursues new learning challenges is not merely slowing aging, but optimizing performance. The narrative changes from one of preservation to one of expansion, where the mind becomes sharper and more refined with experience. It is a rejection of the passive acceptance of decline in favor of an active, scientifically grounded strategy for vitality. Ultimately, the exceptional memory is not a genetic gift reserved for a few, but a biological potential that exists in everyone. It requires the discipline to manage the inputs that the body and brain receive daily. By respecting the biological rhythms, fueling the metabolic engine, and constantly challenging the neural circuits, the years over 50 can be defined by wisdom, clarity, and a robust capacity to remember. The tools are available. The task is simply to pick them up and use them with consistency and intent. What new challenge will I embrace to wake up my mind?